The dust from the fairgrounds still hung in the air when Quinlan Hayes placed his final bid on the last basket of the evening. And though he had no way of knowing it then, that single decision would unravel every thread of loneliness that had wrapped itself around his heart for the past 32 years. It was September 1878 in Hangtown, California, and the Harvest Festival had drawn people from every corner of El Dorado County. Quinlan had only come because his ranch foreman had practically dragged him into town, insisting that a man could not live on cattle and solitude alone. The basket auction was a tradition Quinlan had avoided for years, watching from the periphery as bachelors bid on picnic baskets prepared by the unmarried women of the county. Each basket meant to secure a shared meal and perhaps the beginning of a courtship. But this year, something had compelled him to stay until the very end, until the auctioneer held up the final basket with its simple gingham cloth and modest ribbons. The other men had already claimed their prizes and departed with giggling young women on their arms. This last basket seemed almost forgotten, an afterthought. $5, Quinlan called out, his voice rough from disuse. The auctioneer looked surprised that anyone remained to bid. Sold to Mr. Hayes, Quinlan paid and accepted the basket, noting its surprising weight. He looked around the thinning crowd, expecting someone to approach and claim their place beside him for the meal, but no one came forward. The auctioneer had already begun packing up his podium. "Excuse me," Quinlan said, stepping closer. "Who prepared this basket?" The auctioneer scratched his gray beard. "Can't rightly say. It was dropped off late this afternoon with the entry fee. No name attached, but it was paid for proper, so I included it." Quinlan carried the basket to a quiet spot beneath an old oak tree at the edge of the fairgrounds. The sun was beginning to set, painting the California sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded him of the hills during wildflower season. He untied the gingham cloth and found the basket packed with care. Fresh bread wrapped in cheesecloth, cold fried chicken, potato salad in a sealed jar, apple pie, and a bottle of elderflower lemonade. Beneath the food, his fingers brushed against paper. He pulled out an envelope, unsealed, and withdrew a letter written in elegant script. "Dear Sir," it began. "If you are reading this, then you are either very kind or very hungry. Perhaps both. I should explain myself, though the explanation may seem strange. My name is Adelaide Norton, and I am a widow of 26 years. I have lived in Hangtown for 3 months now, and in that time I have observed the customs of this town with great interest. The basket auction has always intrigued me, but as a widow, I did not feel it appropriate to participate in the traditional manner. Widows are expected to mourn quietly and fade into the background of community life. But I find myself lonely, sir, and loneliness is a burden I no longer wish to carry alone. I do not seek a husband through this letter, only perhaps a friend, someone who might understand what it means to be solitary in a town full of families and coupled hearts. If this seems too forward, please enjoy the meal and forget this letter. But if you feel that same loneliness, that same quiet ache, I would very much like to make your acquaintance. I will be at the schoolhouse tomorrow at noon, should you wish to meet. Yours in hope, Adelaide Norton." Quinlan read the letter 3 times, each word settling into him like rain into parched earth. He had known loneliness for so long that it had become part of his identity. After his parents died when he was 20, he had thrown himself into building his ranch, the Double H, until work became his only companion. Now, 12 years later, he had 500 acres, 24 cattle hands, and not a single person who truly knew him. He carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the basket, then began to eat the meal Adelaide Norton had prepared. Every bite was delicious, seasoned with care and skill. The chicken was perfectly crispy, the bread still soft despite being baked hours ago. The pie tasted like autumn itself, sweet and spiced with cinnamon. As he ate, Quinlan made his decision. He would go to the schoolhouse tomorrow at noon. That night back at the ranch he could barely sleep. He kept thinking about the letter, about the courage it must have taken for Adelaide to write those words and place them in a basket with no guarantee of kindness in return. He wondered what had brought her to Hangtown, what had taken her husband, and what kind of woman she might be. Morning arrived slowly. Quinlan went through his usual routine of checking on the horses, reviewing the day's work with his foreman, and ensuring the ranch ran smoothly. But his mind was elsewhere, counting down the hours until noon. He washed thoroughly, changed into his cleanest shirt and trousers, and rode into town on his buckskin mare. Hangtown was busy with its usual midday activity. Wagons rolling down Main Street, women shopping at the general store, men gathered outside the saloon discussing cattle prices and politics. The schoolhouse sat at the north end of town, a simple white building with a bell tower and a yard where children played during recess. Quinlan arrived 10 minutes early and dismounted, tying his mare to the fence. The school was empty, classes dismissed for the day. He walked around to the back of the building where a small garden grew, maintained by the teacher and her students. At precisely noon, he heard footsteps approaching. He turned and saw her. Adelaide Norton was not what he had expected, though he could not have said what he had been expecting. She was of average height with dark auburn hair pinned up beneath a simple bonnet. Her dress was gray, appropriate for morning, but well-fitted and clean. Her face was lovely in an understated way, with gentle features and eyes the color of honey in sunlight. But it was her expression that struck him most. Uncertainty mixed with determination, hope tempered by the readiness for disappointment. "Mr. Hayes?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. "Madam," he said, removing his hat, "you know my name." "I asked the auctioneer to tell me who won the bid after the fact," she admitted. "I hope that was not too presumptuous." "Not at all. I appreciate honesty." He gestured to a bench near the garden. "Would you like to sit?" They sat together, maintaining a respectful distance. For a moment, neither spoke, and Quinlan felt the weight of years of isolation pressing down on his tongue, making words difficult to form. Adelaide broke the silence. "Thank you for coming. I was not certain you would." "Your letter was the most honest thing anyone has said to me in years," Quinlan replied. "I could not ignore that." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he felt seen in a way he had not experienced since his mother died. "You understand loneliness," she said. "It was not a question." "I do. I have lived with it so long I sometimes forget it is not supposed to be there." Adelaide nodded slowly. "Yes, exactly that. After my husband died 2 years ago in Nevada, I tried to continue living in our home in Virginia City, but everywhere I looked I saw his absence. So I came here, thinking a new place would ease the ache. But loneliness travels with you, I have learned. It does not stay behind." "What did your husband do?" Quinlan asked gently. "He was a mining engineer. A collapse in one of the Comstock lode tunnels took him and 7 other men. He was 30 years old." Her voice remained steady, but Quinlan saw her hands tighten in her lap. "We had been married for 4 years. I am sorry for your loss, and I am sorry for yours," she said, surprising him. "The auctioneer mentioned that you lost your parents young and have run your ranch alone ever since. That is its own kind of loss, is it not? The loss of what might have been." Quinlan felt something crack open inside him, some long sealed place. "I never thought of it that way, but you are right. I lost the future I thought I would have. The one where my father taught me everything, and my mother filled the house with warmth, and I eventually brought home a wife to join them. They sat in silence again, but this time it was comfortable, the silence of two people who understood that some things did not need words. "Tell me about your ranch," Adelaide said eventually. So he did. Quinlan found himself talking more than he had in years, describing the double H, the rhythm of seasons on the land, the satisfaction of watching cattle thrive, the challenges of drought and disease and finding good men to work the range. Adelaide listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was truly paying attention. "It sounds like you have built something remarkable," she said when he finished. "It keeps me busy," he replied. "What do you do here in Hangtown?" "I take in sewing and mending," Adelaide said. "I also help at the general store twice a week. It is not much, but it provides enough for my room at the boarding house and food. I like to keep busy as well." "Where did you learn to cook like that?" The meal in the basket was exceptional. She smiled, and the expression transformed her entire face. "My mother was an excellent cook, and she made sure I learned. She said that cooking was an art and a gift, a way to care for people even when words failed. I find comfort in it." They talked until the afternoon sun began to slant toward evening. Quinlan learned that Adelaide loved to read, that she had grown up in Ohio, that she played the piano though she had not touched one since her husband died, that she missed having a garden of her own. Adelaide learned that Quinlan had taught himself to read from his mother's books, that he had a gift for working with horses, that he sometimes went days without speaking to anyone beyond necessary ranch business, that he had never learned to dance because there had been no one to teach him. "I should get back," Adelaide said finally, though she sounded reluctant. "Mrs. Calloway at the boarding house worries if I am late for supper." Quinlan stood, offering his hand to help her rise. When her fingers touched his, he felt that spark of connection again, that sense of recognition. "May I see you again?" he asked. "I would like that very much. Tomorrow I could come to town. We could take a walk if you would like. Tomorrow would be wonderful." Quinlan rode back to the ranch with a lightness in his chest he had not felt in over a decade. His foreman, a grizzled man named Pete who had worked for Quinlan's father, noticed immediately. "You look different, boss," Pete said. "Something happened in town." "I met someone," Quinlan admitted. Pete grinned. "About damned time." The next day, Quinlan returned to Hangtown, and the day after that, and the day after that. He and Adelaide fell into a pattern of afternoon walks and conversations that ranged from the profound to the mundane. She told him about her marriage, the good parts and the difficult parts, the way her husband had been passionate about his work, but sometimes forgot that she needed attention too. Quinlan told her about the years of building the ranch, the pride and the loneliness intertwined so tightly he could not separate them. After 2 weeks of daily meetings, Adelaide invited Quinlan to have dinner at the boarding house. Mrs. Calloway, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, watched them throughout the meal with obvious approval. "It is good to see Adelaide smiling again," Mrs. Calloway said to Quinlan as he was leaving. "She has been a ghost since she arrived here. You are good for her." "She is good for me as well," Quinlan replied honestly. A month into their courtship, Quinlan brought Adelaide to the Double H. He had been nervous about showing her his home, worried that the rough bachelor quarters would seem crude to someone who valued domestic comfort. But Adelaide walked through the ranch house with interest, noting the sturdy construction and the beautiful views from the windows. "This is a good house," she said. "It has strong bones. It just needs some warmth." "It has been missing that for a long time," Quinlan agreed. Adelaide ran her hand along the kitchen table, made by Quinlan's father from local oak. "May I cook something for you here? A proper meal in a proper kitchen. I would like nothing more." Adelaide came to the ranch the following Sunday, and Quinlan watched in amazement as she transformed his stark kitchen into something alive. She brought supplies from town and set to work making pot roast with vegetables, biscuits, and an apple cobbler. The ranch hands could smell the cooking from the bunkhouse, and Pete joked that they might stage a mutiny to get to Adelaide's food. "Your men are hungry for more than cattle trail meals," Adelaide observed as she worked. "Would you consider cooking for them sometimes?" Quinlan asked. "I would pay you, of course." "I would consider it," she said carefully. "If we decide this is more than friendship, perhaps I could do more than visit occasionally." Quinlan's heart began to race. "Adelaide, I need to be honest with you. This has not been just friendship for me, not for weeks now. I am courting you with serious intentions. I am falling in love with you." Adelaide set down the spoon she was holding and turned to face him fully. Her eyes were bright. "I am falling in love with you too, Quinlan, but I worry. I worry that I am too broken from losing James. I worry that you are lonely enough to settle for anyone who pays you attention. I worry that we are rushing because we both ache so much for connection." Quinlan crossed the kitchen and took her hands in his. "I will not lie and say those worries are unfounded. But I will say this. I have been alone for 12 years. In that time I met many women and I felt nothing. With you, I feel everything. You make me want to be more than a rancher who works himself to exhaustion. You make me want to build a life, not just a ranch." "I want that too," Adelaide whispered. "I want it so much it frightens me." "Then let us be frightened together," Quinlan said. She smiled and leaned forward, resting her forehead against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, and they stood like that for a long moment, just breathing together. That evening, after the meal that had the ranch hands singing Adelaide's praises, Quinlan drove her back to town in his wagon. The October night was cool and clear, the stars scattered across the sky like seeds in dark soil. "I want to court you properly," Quinlan said as they rode. "I want to give you time to be sure, but I also want you to know that my intentions are marriage if you will have me." "I want to be sure too," Adelaide said. "Not because I doubt my feelings, but because I want to honor what we are building. I do not want to rush into marriage out of loneliness. I want to choose it out of love." "That seems wise. Give me until Christmas," Adelaide said. "Court me properly until then. Let us learn each other in all the small ways, and if we still feel this way when winter truly sets in, ask me then." "I can do that," Quinlan agreed. The months between October and Christmas were some of the happiest of Quinlan's life. He courted Adelaide with old-fashioned dedication, calling on her at the boarding house, taking her on proper outings, attending church with her on Sundays. Adelaide began cooking for the Double H Ranch hands once a week, and they welcomed her like she was already part of the family. Quinlan learned Adelaide's habits, how she hummed while cooking, how she read every evening before bed, how she was kind to everyone but had a spine of steel when facing injustice. He had seen her defend a Chinese laundry worker from harassment in town, stepping between the man and his tormentors with such fierce righteousness that the troublemakers had backed down in shame. Adelaide learned Quinlan's depths, his unexpected gentleness with animals, his fairness with his workers, his quiet generosity that helped struggling families without seeking recognition. She learned that he was a man of few words but deep feelings, and that once he gave his loyalty, it was unshakable. In November, Adelaide shared a confidence that she had been holding close. "I cannot have children," she said quietly one evening as they sat in her boarding house parlor. "James and I tried for 4 years, and I consulted a doctor in Virginia City before he died. He said it was unlikely I would ever conceive. I need you to know this before you propose. I know men want heirs." Quinlan took her hand. "I want you, Adelaide." I will not pretend that I never thought about children, but I have spent 12 years building something permanent. The ranch will continue whether I have blood heirs or not. And there are other ways to build a family if we want one. But mainly, I want you." She cried then, not from sadness but from relief and love. Quinlan held her and let her cry, understanding that she had been carrying this fear for months. As Christmas approached, Hangtown transformed with decorations and festivities. Adelaide helped organize the church's charity efforts, and Quinlan donated generously to ensure that every family in the county had food for the winter. They attended a Christmas dance together, and Adelaide taught Quinlan the basic steps while laughing at his initial clumsiness. By the end of the evening, he was waltzing with confidence, and other couples had stopped to watch them move together with such natural harmony. On Christmas Eve, Quinlan came to the boarding house with a small box in his pocket. His hands were shaking as Mrs. Calloway led him into the parlor where Adelaide waited. She wore a deep green dress that made her eyes shine gold, and her hair was arranged beautifully. "You look lovely," Quinlan said. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." He sat beside her on the settee, suddenly more nervous than he had ever been breaking a wild horse. "Adelaide, these past few months have been the best of my life. You have brought light to places in me I thought would always be dark. You have made me believe in futures I had stopped imagining. I love you more than I have words to express." "I love you too, Quinlan," Adelaide said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have given me hope again. You have shown me that life after loss is not just possible but can be beautiful." Quinlan pulled out the small box and opened it, revealing a simple gold band with a small ruby set in it. "This was my mother's ring. My father gave it to her when they married, and she told me to save it for someone worthy. You are more than worthy, Adelaide. You are everything. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Adelaide's face as she nodded. "Yes, yes, Quinlan, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as though it had been waiting for her all along. Then he cupped her face gently and kissed her for the first time. It was soft and sweet and full of promise, the kiss of two people who had found each other against all odds. Mrs. Calloway burst into the parlor moments later with cider and cookies, claiming she had been waiting for this moment since Adelaide first mentioned meeting Quinlan. Other boarders came to congratulate them, and the evening became an impromptu celebration. They were married in early February 1879, in Hangtown's small church with most of the town in attendance. Adelaide wore a dress of cream silk that she had sewn herself, and Quinlan wore a new suit that made him look almost uncomfortable with its formality. But when he saw Adelaide walking down the aisle, his face transformed with such joy that several women in the congregation wept. Pete served as Quinlan's best man, and Mrs. Calloway stood with Adelaide. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. The reception was held at the ranch, which Adelaide had spent weeks preparing. She had sewn new curtains, arranged wildflowers in every room, and transformed the stark bachelor quarters into a warm home. The ranch hands had built tables outside for the feast, and Adelaide had cooked for days with the help of several women from town. As the sun set on their wedding day, Quinlan and Adelaide stood together on the porch of their home, watching their guests dance and celebrate in the yard. "Happy?" Quinlan asked, his arm around his wife's waist. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again," Adelaide replied. "Thank you for bidding on that basket. Thank you for putting the letter inside." They kissed as husband and wife while the stars began to appear overhead, and Quinlan thought about how a single moment of decision had changed everything. If he had left the fair early, if Adelaide had lost her courage, if either of them had chosen to remain in their loneliness, They would never have found this joy. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, but a happy one. Adelaide brought order and warmth to the ranch house, and Quinlan found himself hurrying through his work to spend evenings with his wife. They cooked together, read aloud to each other, and talked endlessly about everything and nothing. Adelaide became beloved by the ranch hands, who appreciated her excellent cooking and her genuine interest in their lives. She learned all their names, remembered their stories, and advocated for better living conditions in the bunkhouse. Quinlan found himself making improvements he had never considered necessary, until Adelaide gently pointed out that men worked better when they were treated well. In late spring, Adelaide planted a large garden behind the house, growing vegetables and herbs and flowers. Quinlan built her raised beds and a small greenhouse, and they worked the soil together on warm evenings. Adelaide said it reminded her of helping her mother garden as a child, and she loved having dirt under her fingernails again. One evening in June, as they weeded the garden together, Adelaide said, "I have been thinking about what you said regarding family." Quinlan looked up from the tomato plants. "Yes, there is a children's home in Sacramento, an orphanage. I have been corresponding with the woman who runs it, and she says they have many children who need families. Children whose parents died or abandoned them, children from difficult circumstances." Adelaide paused, meeting his eyes. "Would you consider adopting, giving a child a home who has none?" Quinlan set down his trowel and moved to sit beside his wife. "I think that is a beautiful idea. I would be honored to give a child the kind of home and love my parents gave me." Adelaide's face lit up with relief and excitement. "Truly, you are not just saying this to please me, truly. Tell me more about what you have learned." They talked late into the evening about the possibility, about what it would mean to bring a child into their lives, about the responsibilities and joys. The more they discussed it, the more right it felt. In July, Quinlan and Adelaide traveled to Sacramento to visit the orphanage. The building was clean but overcrowded, filled with children of all ages. The director, a kind woman named Mrs. Patterson, showed them around and introduced them to various children. Adelaide was drawn to a quiet boy of about 7 who sat alone in a corner, reading a worn book. "Who is that?" she asked. "That is Thomas," Mrs. Patterson said softly. "His parents were killed by influenza 2 years ago. He is a sweet child but very withdrawn. He rarely speaks and prefers books to people." Adelaide approached the boy slowly. "Hello, Thomas. What are you reading?" The boy looked up with large brown eyes and held up the book. It was a collection of frontier tales. "I love stories about the frontier," Adelaide said, sitting nearby. "My husband and I live on a ranch. We have horses and cattle and a big garden. Do you like animals?" Thomas nodded slowly. "Would you like to visit our ranch sometime? You could see the horses. My husband is very good with them. He could teach you to ride if you wanted to learn." For the first time, Thomas's expression showed interest. "Really?" he whispered. "Really," Adelaide confirmed. Quinlan watched his wife's gentle interaction with the boy and felt his heart expand. When Adelaide looked at him with hope in her eyes, he knew what she was asking. "Thomas," Quinlan said, crouching down to the boy's level, "how would you feel about coming to live with us? Not just visiting, but staying. We would like to be your family if you would like that." Thomas looked between them with disbelief. "You want me?" "Very much," Adelaide said, tears in her eyes. "But I am not good at things," Thomas said. "I am scared of loud noises and I cannot run as fast as other boys, and I like reading more than playing." "We like reading too," Quinlan said, "and there is nothing wrong with being thoughtful and quiet. I am that way myself. We want you just as you are, Thomas." The boy began to cry, and Adelaide gathered him into her arms. Within moments, it was decided. Mrs. Patterson was delighted to place Thomas with such a loving family, and the paperwork was arranged quickly. They brought Thomas home to the Double H a week later, after preparing a room for him and gathering books and toys. The boy was overwhelmed at first, unused to so much space and attention. But Adelaide and Quinlan were patient, letting him adjust at his own pace. Pete and the ranch hands were wonderful with Thomas, teaching him about ranch life without pressure. Slowly, the boy began to open up, asking questions and showing curiosity about the world around him. By autumn, Thomas had bonded with a gentle gelding named Copper, and Quinlan taught him to ride. Adelaide taught him to help in the garden and the kitchen, and Thomas discovered he had a talent for baking. The boy, who had barely spoken, now filled the house with questions and observations. One evening in October, a year after Quinlan had bid on Adelaide's basket, the three of them sat together after supper. Thomas was reading aloud from one of his books, and Adelaide was mending clothes while Quinlan whittled a small horse for Thomas's growing collection of wooden animals. Thomas paused in his reading. "Can I call you mother and father?" he asked shyly. Adelaide set down her mending, her eyes filling with tears. "We would love that, sweetheart. We would be honored," Quinlan added, his voice rough with emotion. Thomas smiled and returned to his book, and Adelaide reached over to squeeze Quinlan's hand. They had built this family from loneliness and loss, from courage and hope, and it was more beautiful than either had imagined possible. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. A hard winter in 1880 killed some cattle and required careful management to keep the ranch solvent. Thomas struggled with nightmares about losing his birth parents, and Adelaide sat with him through many difficult nights. Quinlan dealt with rustlers and a dishonest cattle buyer who tried to cheat him, but through every challenge, they faced it together. Adelaide's strength and wisdom complemented Quinlan's steady reliability. Thomas grew into a confident boy, excelling in school and showing a gift for numbers that would eventually help manage the ranch's finances. In the spring of 1882, Adelaide and Quinlan returned to the orphanage and adopted two more children, sisters named Emma and Clara, aged 5 and 8, whose parents had died in a wagon accident. The girls were shy at first, but Thomas took them under his wing, showing them the ranch and introducing them to the animals. Emma was bold and adventurous, always climbing trees and exploring. Clara was artistic, drawing everything she saw and showing remarkable talent. Adelaide nurtured both girls' gifts while teaching them practical skills, and Quinlan found himself learning to braid hair and calm nighttime fears. The ranch house that had once been silent and empty now rang with children's laughter, arguments, and endless questions. Adelaide's kitchen became the heart of the home, always full of good smells and conversation. Quinlan built additions to the house to accommodate their growing family, and every evening they gathered for supper and shared the events of their days. By 1885, the Double H was known throughout El Dorado County as one of the most successful and well-run ranches, but also as a place of unexpected warmth. Quinlan and Adelaide had earned reputations for fairness and kindness, always willing to help neighbors in need. They hired workers others considered unemployable and gave them second chances. They donated to the church and the school. They opened their home to travelers who needed a meal or a place to rest. Thomas, now 15, had grown into a thoughtful young man who managed the ranch's books with impressive skill. He had also developed an interest in law and talked about perhaps becoming a lawyer someday to help people who could not help themselves. Quinlan encouraged this dream, proud that his son wanted to make a difference in the world. Emma, now 10, was as wild as the mustangs that sometimes wandered onto their land, and she rode like she had been born in the saddle. She declared she would be a rancher like her father, and Quinlan suspected she might be even better at it than he was. Clara, now 13, had filled the house with her artwork and had recently begun giving drawing lessons to other children in town for extra money. She was quiet like Thomas but observed everything with an artist's eye. One evening in late summer, after the children had gone to bed, Quinlan and Adelaide sat on their porch watching the sun set over their land. Adelaide rested her head on Quinlan's shoulder. "You remember the day we met?" she asked. "At the schoolhouse." "I remember everything about that day," Quinlan replied. "I remember being terrified and hopeful at the same time. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met, putting that letter in the basket." "I remember thinking you might not come," Adelaide said. "I almost did not go to the schoolhouse. I thought I was being foolish, that no one would want to know a sad widow." "I am glad you were foolish," Quinlan said, kissing the top of her head. "Your foolishness gave me everything I have now." "Our foolishness," Adelaide corrected. "You were foolish enough to bid on a basket with no name attached. Best decision I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the evening sounds, cattle lowing in the distance, horses moving in the corral, crickets beginning their night song. "Are you happy, Quinlan?" Adelaide asked. "Truly happy. More than I ever thought possible," he answered honestly. "There are days when I look around at our life and cannot believe it is real. 3 beautiful children, a thriving ranch, and a wife I love more with each passing year. What more could a man want?" "I feel the same," Adelaide said. "I never thought I would love again after James died. I thought that part of my life was over. But what I feel for you is different and deeper than anything I felt before. Maybe because we both knew loss, we appreciate what we have more." "Maybe," Quinlan agreed. "Or maybe we were just meant to find each other, and everything that came before was leading us to that moment at the fair." In the autumn of 1885, the Harvest Festival came around again, and Quinlan and Adelaide attended with their children. The basket auction was still a tradition, and they watched young people bid and pair off with the same nervous excitement they had felt years ago. "Should we tell them?" Thomas asked, nodding toward a shy young man who was clearly working up courage to bid. "Tell them what?" Emma asked. "How Mother and Father met," Thomas said. "Through the basket auction." "Oh, we should definitely tell them," Emma exclaimed, but Adelaide shook her head with a gentle smile. "Let them have their own story. Ours is ours alone." As they walked through the fairgrounds, several people stopped to greet them and congratulate Quinlan on winning first prize for his cattle. Adelaide had won a ribbon for her preserves, and Clara had taken second place in the art competition. Emma had competed in barrel racing and come in third, which she declared was unfair because the winner's horse was clearly faster. "Next year," Quinlan told her, "we will train harder and you will win. Promise?" Emma asked. "Promise." That evening, as they drove home in the wagon with the children dozing in the back, Adelaide said, 7 years ago, I put a letter in a basket and hoped someone kind would find it. I never imagined it would lead to all of this." "What did you imagine?" Quinlan asked. "Maybe a friend," Adelaide said. "Someone to share a meal with occasionally, someone who understood loneliness. I did not dare hope for love or family or a home like this. It seemed like too much to ask for." "I am glad you asked anyway," Quinlan said. "I am glad you were brave enough to reach out. I am glad you were brave enough to reach back." The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. In 1887, Pete died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, and the entire county attended his funeral. Quinlan gave the eulogy, honoring the man who had been like a second father to him. Thomas, Emma, and Clara mourned the loss of the grandfather figure who had taught them so much about ranching and life. But new life balanced the loss. That same year, Thomas left for university in San Francisco to study law, and though they missed him terribly, Quinlan and Adelaide were proud beyond measure. Emma took over more responsibilities on the ranch, proving herself as capable as any of the adult hands. Clara began selling her artwork and saving money for art school. In 1889, a severe drought tested the ranch's resources, and Quinlan had to make difficult decisions about selling cattle and conserving water. Adelaide organized the women of Hangtown to share resources and help families struggling with the lack of rain. Together, the community weathered the drought, and when the rains finally returned in the spring of 1890, there was a town-wide celebration. Thomas returned from university in 1891, now a qualified lawyer at 21, and announced he would be opening a practice in Hangtown to serve the people of El Dorado County. Quinlan and Adelaide helped him establish his office, and Thomas quickly became known for taking on cases others would not touch, defending those who could not afford fancy lawyers. Emma, at 16, was running much of the day-to-day ranch operations and had ideas for expanding and improving that impressed even the most experienced ranchers in the county. Clara, at 19, had been accepted to an art school in San Francisco and would be leaving in the fall, though she promised to return to Hangtown often. On a warm evening in June 1891, Quinlan and Adelaide celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary quietly at home. The children had organized a family dinner with all of Adelaide's favorite foods, and Clara had drawn a beautiful portrait of her parents that captured not just their faces but the deep affection between them. After the children retired for the evening, Quinlan and Adelaide walked out to the garden Adelaide had planted so many years ago. It had expanded over time, and now included a small orchard, berry bushes, and a riotous flower garden that attracted butterflies and hummingbirds. 12 years, Adelaide said, linking her arm through Quinlan's. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean, Quinlan replied. Sometimes I still feel like that nervous man at the schoolhouse, hoping desperately that you would show up. Other times, I cannot remember what life was like before you. It was lonely, Adelaide said simply, for both of us, but we found each other and we built something extraordinary from that loneliness. Quinlan stopped walking and turned to face his wife. At 44, she was even more beautiful to him than she had been at 26. Time had added fine lines around her eyes and streaks of silver to her auburn hair, but it had also added depth and confidence that made her radiant. I love you, Adelaide Hayes, he said. More than the land, more than the ranch, more than anything in this world, you and our children are my greatest achievement. Adelaide's eyes filled with tears. And you are mine, Quinlan Hayes. You took a broken widow's fragile hope and turned it into a life more wonderful than any dream I ever had. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose, and a love that makes every day a gift. They kissed in the garden as the stars came out overhead, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. In 1893, Emma married a neighboring rancher's son, a young man named Daniel who matched her in both skill and spirit. The wedding was held at the Double H, and the entire county came to celebrate. Quinlan walked his daughter down the aisle with tears in his eyes, remembering the shy little girl who had arrived 10 years earlier and become this confident, capable woman. You will always be my little girl, he whispered as he placed her hand in Daniel's. I know, Pa, Emma whispered back, and you will always be my hero. Emma and Daniel built a house on the far edge of the Double H property, and Emma continued to help run the ranch alongside her father. In 1894, she gave birth to Quinlan and Adelaide's first grandchild, a healthy boy they named Quinlan Peter, after both his grandfathers. Holding his grandson for the first time, Quinlan felt the circle of life complete itself. He thought of his own parents, long dead, and wished they could see what he had built. But perhaps they knew somehow. Perhaps they had guided him to that fair, to that basket, to Adelaide. Clara returned from art school in 1895, newly married to a fellow artist named Robert. They settled in Hangtown, where Clara opened a studio and taught art to anyone who wanted to learn. She and Robert filled their small house with paintings and laughter, and a menagerie of animals Clara insisted on rescuing. Thomas, now 25, had become one of the most respected lawyers in Northern California. He had successfully argued several important cases and was known for his passionate defense of the vulnerable. He remained unmarried, claiming he had not yet found someone who could match his mother's wisdom and kindness. "You set the standard too high, Ma," he joked one evening at family dinner. "Nonsense," Adelaide replied. "The right person will come along when you least expect it." That is how the best love stories begin. She exchanged a knowing look with Quinlan across the table, and he smiled. By 1896, 18 years after Quinlan had bid on that fateful basket, the Double H had become one of the most successful ranches in El Dorado County. But more than that, it had become a symbol of what was possible when people chose hope over loneliness, when they reached out instead of closing off, when they built with love instead of fear. Quinlan was now 50 years old, his dark hair streaked with silver, his face lined from years of outdoor work. But he moved with the ease of a man content with his life, and his eyes still lit up every time Adelaide entered a room. Adelaide, at 44, had grown into herself in ways she never could have as a young widow. She was respected throughout the county for her charitable work, her wisdom, and her unwavering moral compass. She had helped establish a proper school in Hangtown, organized relief efforts during hard times, and quietly supported families struggling with poverty or illness. Their children had grown into remarkable adults. Thomas, the crusading lawyer, Emma, the innovative rancher, Clara, the talented artist. Each had found their own path while maintaining the values their parents had instilled. And now, grandchildren were beginning to arrive, filling the ranch with new life and energy. One evening in the autumn of 1896, Adelaide found a box in the attic while organizing old household items. Inside was the gingham cloth from the basket she had prepared 18 years ago, carefully folded and preserved. Beneath it was the letter she had written, returned to her by Quinlan at some point, though she could not remember when. She sat in the dusty attic reading her own words from so long ago, words written by a woman she barely recognized now. That Adelaide had been so wounded, so tentative, so afraid to hope. This Adelaide was strong and confident and surrounded by love. Found something interesting? Quinlan asked, climbing up into the attic. Adelaide showed him the letter. "Listen to this part," she said, reading aloud. "I do not seek a husband through this letter, only perhaps a friend." Quinlan laughed. "Well, you certainly got more than you bargained for." "The best surprises are the ones we do not plan," Adelaide said, folding the letter carefully. "I wrote this thinking I would be alone forever. I could not imagine love again. And then you appeared, this quiet, lonely cowboy who understood exactly how I felt." "We saved each other," Quinlan said, sitting beside her in the dusty attic. "I truly believe that. If we had not found each other, I would still be running this ranch alone, working myself to death and calling it a life. You gave me a reason to live instead of just survive." "And you gave me hope when I thought I had none left," Adelaide replied. "You showed me that endings can become beginnings if we are brave enough to try." They sat together in the quiet attic, holding hands and thinking about the long journey that had brought them here. From loneliness to love, from loss to family, from two solitary people to the center of a web of connections that spread through their entire community. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you had not bid on the basket?" Adelaide asked. "Never," Quinlan said firmly. "Because I did bid on it. I followed my instinct and it led me to you. Wondering about other paths is pointless when the one I took gave me everything." "That is a very wise perspective," Adelaide observed. "I learned it from my wife," Quinlan said. "She is the wisest person I know." They climbed down from the attic and returned to the main house, where the dinner Adelaide had prepared earlier was waiting. It was just the two of them that evening, as the children were all occupied with their own families and lives. These quiet evenings together had become precious, a chance to reconnect and remember why they had chosen each other in the first place. Over dinner, they talked about everything and nothing. Ranch business, town gossip, plans for the upcoming winter, dreams for the future. The conversation flowed as easily as it had from their very first meeting, that natural compatibility that had made them both realize they had found something rare. After dinner, they sat together on the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the October chill. The stars were brilliant overhead, unpolluted by city lights, a vast tapestry of possibility. "I want to grow old with you," Adelaide said suddenly. "I want to sit on this porch when we are 70 and 80 and 90 if we live that long. I want to watch our grandchildren grow up and have children of their own. I want every remaining day of my life to include you." "You have me," Quinlan promised, "for every remaining day and whatever comes after. You have had my heart since I read that letter, and you will have it always." They kissed under the stars, two people who had found each other through courage and chance, who had built a life and a family from the ruins of their separate loneliness, who had proven that hope and love could triumph over grief and isolation. The years continued to roll forward, bringing changes both expected and surprising. In 1898, Thomas finally met his match in Sarah, a young widow with a sharp legal mind and a passion for justice. They married and opened a law practice together, defending the rights of workers and immigrants in the rapidly changing California landscape. Emma and Daniel expanded their ranching operation and became known for their innovative techniques and fair treatment of workers. They had 3 more children, giving Quinlan and Adelaide 4 grandchildren from Emma alone. Clara and Robert became fixtures of the Hangtown art community, and Clara's paintings began to sell to galleries in San Francisco and even back east. She used her success to fund art education for children who could not afford it, remembering her own childhood in the orphanage. By 1900, Quinlan was 54 and beginning to feel the weight of decades of ranch work in his joints. Adelaide, at 48, remained active and involved in community life, though she too was beginning to slow down. They talked about eventually handing more responsibility to Emma and Daniel, about spending their later years traveling and visiting their children and grandchildren. But first, they had one more project. "I want to expand the house," Adelaide announced one morning at breakfast. "Not for us, but to create space for orphan children, a proper home where they can stay while waiting for adoption or aging out of the system. Something better than the overcrowded orphanages in the cities." Quinlan looked at his wife with renewed admiration. "You want to turn our home into an orphanage?" "Not exactly," Adelaide clarified. "I want to create a family-style home. A place where 6 or 8 children can live at a time, with house parents who care for them, where they can attend school and have a real childhood." We could fund it through the ranch profits and donations. We could give other children what we gave Thomas, Emma, and Clara. That is a beautiful idea, Quinlan said. Let us do it. They spent the next year planning and building, adding a large wing to the ranch house with bedrooms, a playroom, and a study area. They hired a couple from town, the Richardsons, who had experience with children and wanted to dedicate their lives to helping orphans. In the spring of 1901, the Norton Hayes Home for Children officially opened, named after both Adelaide's maiden name and their married name. The first residents were 6 children from the Sacramento orphanage, ranging in age from 4 to 14. They arrived scared and uncertain, but within weeks, the ranch had worked its magic. Quinlan and Adelaide did not run the home directly, trusting the Richardsons for daily operations, but they were involved grandparents to all the children. Adelaide taught cooking and gardening classes. Quinlan taught riding and ranch skills. Their own children and grandchildren visited often, creating an extended family atmosphere that helped the orphans feel less alone. Some children were adopted by local families. Others grew up in the home and left as young adults, equipped with education and skills and the knowledge that they were loved. All carried with them the legacy of 2 people who had understood loneliness and refused to let others suffer it if they could help. By 1905, Quinlan was 59 and Adelaide was 53. Quinlan had officially retired from day-to-day ranch management, leaving the operation to Emma and Daniel. But he still rode the property daily, checking on cattle and horses, unable to fully give up the work that had defined so much of his life. Adelaide had slowed down as well, letting younger women take over some of her charitable work. But she still cooked for the children's home and still tended her garden and still filled their house with warmth. They had been married for 26 years, together for 27. They had raised 3 children to successful adulthood, helped dozens more through the children's home, and built a legacy that would outlast them. The Double H was prosperous and respected, but more importantly, it was a place of hope and second chances. One evening in June, close to their anniversary, Quinlan and Adelaide took a long walk around the ranch. Their pace was slower than it once had been, but the companionship was just as sweet. They walked past the main house with its additions and improvements, past the barn where Emma's children were learning to ride, past the children's home where laughter echoed from the windows. They walked through Adelaide's extensive gardens, past the orchard heavy with ripening fruit, to a small hill that overlooked the entire property. From here, they could see everything they had built together. The house, the outbuildings, the pastures full of cattle, the mountains in the distance, the town of Hangtown nestled in the valley. Not bad for a lonely cowboy and a sad widow, Quinlan observed. Adelaide laughed. Not bad at all. We did good, didn't we? We did better than good. We created something that matters. A family, a home, a place where people can heal and grow and become who they are meant to be. All because I put a letter in a basket, Adelaide mused. All because I was foolish enough to bid on the last basket at the fair, Quinlan corrected. Our best foolishness, Adelaide agreed. They stood on the hill as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Quinlan's arm was around Adelaide's waist, and her head rested on his shoulder, the same comfortable position they had held countless times over the decades. "Do you have any regrets?" Adelaide asked. Quinlan thought carefully before answering. "I regret the years before you, not what I did during them, because that built the ranch and prepared me for our life together. But I regret the loneliness, the sense of just passing time instead of living. I am grateful those years are over." "I regret not finding you sooner," Adelaide said, "but I suppose we found each other at exactly the right time. Any earlier and we would have been different people. We might not have recognized what we had. That is true. Timing matters. They stood in silence for a while, watching the light fade and the stars emerge. "I love you, Adelaide Hayes," Quinlan said, the same words he had spoken thousands of times over the years, but always with sincerity. "I love you, Quinlan Hayes," Adelaide replied, her voice warm with emotion. "Thank you for bidding on my basket. Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely widow with a fragile hope. Thank you for every day since." "Thank you for being brave enough to write that letter," Quinlan said. "Thank you for not giving up on the possibility of connection. Thank you for building this life with me." They walked back to the house slowly, hand in hand as darkness settled over the ranch. Inside, lights glowed in windows and they could hear the sounds of family and life. Children laughing at the children's home, ranch hands finishing their evening chores, Emma's family preparing for bed in their nearby house. Quinlan and Adelaide entered their own home, the place that had transformed from a lonely bachelor's quarters to a warm family residence, to the heart of something even larger. Adelaide put water on for tea, and Quinlan stoked the fire against the cool evening. They sat together in their favorite chairs, sipping tea and reading, the comfortable silence of two people who had spent decades learning each other's rhythms. Eventually, Adelaide set down her book and looked at her husband. "You remember everything I wrote in that letter?" she asked. "Every word," Quinlan confirmed. "You wrote that you were lonely and did not want to carry that burden alone anymore. You wrote that you did not seek a husband, only a friend. You wrote that you would be at the schoolhouse at noon." "And you came," Adelaide said softly. "I came," Quinlan agreed. "Because I was lonely too, and I recognized that loneliness in your words. I came because you were brave, and I wanted to be brave too. I came because something in me knew that my life was about to change. Did you ever imagine it would change this much?" Quinlan looked around their home, thought about their children and grandchildren, the ranch, the children's home, the community they had built and served. "No," he said honestly. "I imagined maybe finding a friend, perhaps eventually a wife. I did not imagine all of this. This exceeded every dream." "Mine too," Adelaide said. "I wrote that letter thinking I might find someone to share a meal with occasionally. I found a soulmate, a partner, a love that has sustained me through every joy and challenge. I found a family and a purpose and a home. We found each other," Quinlan said simply. "And that made everything else possible." They finished their tea and retired to their bedroom, the same room where they had spent thousands of nights together. As Quinlan held Adelaide close, feeling her breathe in the rhythm of approaching sleep, he thought about all the nights he had spent alone before her, how cold and empty this room had been. Now it was filled with warmth and love, with the presence of the woman who had saved him from a life of isolation. Every night beside her was a gift, every morning waking up together a blessing. The years that remained to them passed peacefully. They watched their grandchildren grow, saw Thomas and Sarah adopt 2 children of their own, attended Emma's children's weddings, and celebrated Clara's success as her art gained national recognition. The children's home flourished, helping hundreds of orphans find either adoptive families or the skills to build independent lives. Quinlan's health began to fail in 1912, at the age of 66. The decades of hard ranch work had taken their toll, and his doctor warned that his heart was wearing out. But Quinlan faced this final challenge with the same steady courage he had brought to everything in life. "I am not afraid," he told Adelaide one evening as they sat together. "I've lived a full life, far fuller than I ever expected. I have loved and been loved. I have built something that will last beyond me. I am at peace." Adelaide held his hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. I am not ready to lose you. I know that is selfish, but I am not ready. I know, my love. I am not ready to leave you either. But we do not always get to choose the timing of these things. What we can choose is to make every remaining moment count. And they did. For the months that remained, Quinlan and Adelaide filled their days with family and memories. They sat for hours with their children, sharing stories and wisdom. They played with their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They walked slowly through the gardens and the ranch, saying goodbye to the places that had meant so much to them. On a warm evening in early September 1912, 34 years after he had bid on a basket at the Hangtown Fair, Quinlan Hayes died peacefully in his sleep, Adelaide beside him holding his hand. He was 66 years old and had lived more in his final 34 years than many people lived in longer lifetimes. The funeral was attended by hundreds. Thomas delivered a eulogy that captured his father's quiet strength, his generosity, his unwavering love for his family. Emma spoke of his integrity and his wisdom. Clara read a poem about the legacy of love he had left behind. The town of Hangtown mourned a man who had helped build their community into something better. Adelaide grieved deeply, but not desperately. She had lost her first husband to sudden tragedy, with no chance for goodbye. With Quinlan, she had been able to prepare, to say everything that needed to be said, to have no regrets. She mourned the loss of her soulmate, but she celebrated the decades they had shared. In the years after Quinlan's death, Adelaide continued to live at the Double H, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She remained active in the children's home and the community, carrying on the work she and Quinlan had started together. She found comfort in her garden, in cooking for her family, in the daily rhythms of life on the ranch. She never remarried, telling anyone who asked that she had been blessed with two great loves in her life, and that was more than most people ever got. She wore both wedding rings, James's and Quinlan's, as symbols of the two men who had shaped her life. Adelaide lived to the age of 78, dying peacefully in 1929, surrounded by 3 generations of family. In her final hours, she spoke of Quinlan, of the day they met at the schoolhouse, of the life they had built together. "Tell young people," she whispered to her children, "that it is never too late for happiness. Tell them to be brave enough to reach out, to hope, to try. Tell them that sometimes the best things in life start with a simple act of courage." She was buried beside Quinlan in the Hangtown Cemetery, their graves marked with simple headstones that recorded their names, dates, and a single inscription: "Together in life, together in eternity." The Double H Ranch continued under Emma's management, then passed to her children and grandchildren. The Norton Hayes Home for Children operated until 1965, helping thousands of orphans over its 64 years of operation. Even after it closed, the legacy continued through the countless lives it had touched. In Hangtown, which would eventually be renamed Placerville, the story of Quinlan and Adelaide became local legend. Old-timers would tell young couples about the lonely cowboy who bid on the last basket at the fair and found a letter from a widow inside. They would tell about how that single act of courage led to a love story that transformed not just 2 lives but an entire community. The story became a reminder that loneliness did not have to be permanent, that reaching out was worth the risk, that love could be found even after loss, that it was never too late to build something beautiful. And somewhere, in whatever came after, Quinlan and Adelaide were together again, perhaps sitting on a porch watching a sunset, perhaps walking hand in hand through endless gardens, perhaps simply existing in that state of perfect companionship they had found in life and refused to surrender even to death. Their story had ended, but their legacy lived on in the children they had raised, the orphans they had helped, the community they had served, and the countless people who heard their story and found the courage to reach out, to hope, to try for connection instead of accepting loneliness. It had all started with a basket, a letter, and two people brave enough to believe that they deserved more than solitude. From that small beginning, they had built something magnificent, something that lasted far beyond their mortal years, something that proved that love, when nurtured with care and courage, could transform the world. The end.